everyone. Welcome back to the Optimization Toolbox Podcast. My name is Jenna Redfield, and today we have Jen here. Jen is a local friend of mine. We've known each other for several years, and she recently started a group called Zeroproof Collective, which basically is supporting people, specifically people as also businesses that are supporting the Zeroproof initiative, which is basically non-alcoholic beverage options. Welcome, Jen, to the Optimization Toolbox Podcast.
I am so happy to be here, Jenna. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, I'm excited. We run into each other a lot around town because we both have a lot of shared interests in the fitness community and different things, as well as just other networking events. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you do a lot of different things, and kind of share a little bit of your story.
Yeah, well, it's a history of 20 plus years in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area and business community. I currently have 3 businesses. So we'll talk about those today, but Spark Track is my marketing communication business that relates to events that I've had for 10 years. And then I also have my personal brand, which is jengilhoi.com, which is where I started talking about my recovery journey and sobriety, which we'll get into. And then recently in May of 2022, launched Zeroproof Collective, which is for people in the non-alcoholic industry who are business leaders who want to see change in our social spaces. So we can dive into all of that, but that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think it's so cool. I'm really curious about like how you decided to start that, because I know that's part of your journey. Can you maybe share a little bit about your journey and then maybe where the idea started for Zeroproof?
Yeah, so corporate America was the career path that I saw in front of me. At age 20, graduating from college, I just saw a corporate career. Like, I didn't look at entrepreneurship. I didn't really see that as an option for me. So I spent several years in corporate America, and at about age 40, experienced burnout in the form of alcohol misuse, and realized that I needed to change my life, like, dramatically. And I questioned at that point whether I could do that in a corporate environment or not. And I naturally just fell into entrepreneurship. And so through that journey, what I say is I created a culture of one, because I was in an environment where there was just a lot of drinking and events, and things were always the norm. And so when I went on my own, I could kind of take that time to heal myself and not be around environments that were so centralized around alcohol. And it did help me heal. And what came from that was just this idea that entrepreneurship is actually pretty much like in my blood. Like, I love it. And after being at Modern Well, which we can talk about, Jenna, too, because that's where we connected a lot, it ended up being that there's a lot of entrepreneurs there, and I saw it modeled for me. So I kept expanding. And then my sobriety journey, at about 4 years in, I finally felt like I could talk about it. There's so much shame and stigma around it that for those early years, I really didn't share that. And it became apparent to me when I started, going back into events and wanting to participate in these celebratory, celebrations that were business networking or whatever. And there weren't options. So I just fell into this idea that we need inclusivity in our spaces. And then fast forward to last spring, where we really got serious about, okay, what does this look like? How do we model this for, people in the Twin Cities, but eventually nationally?
Yeah. And how did you decide to start, like, what it is now? Like, was it just like, is this a business? Is this a group? Like, how did you kind of decide on, like, what even was the main issue that you wanted to solve?
Yeah, it was, we looked at many different ways to monetize what is happening in the non-alcoholic industry, but really true to how I operate is I'm a community builder. And so first and foremost, we realized we don't know as much as we'd like to about the marketplace, the appetite. There's huge barriers when you're addressing the removal of alcohol from spaces, and people get very, don't take it away. What are you trying to, move forward with this idea? Is it prohibition? There's a lot of history around the idea of taking alcohol away. So we wanted to form a group so we could actually have conversations from people in different industries, bars, restaurants, events, We have, general managers, bartenders, people that create non-alcoholic beverages all come to our meetings. And from that, we are learning so much. Like even from our first meeting last year to now, it's changed dramatically. And we do have ideas for specific like service offerings, but the essence of what we've created is a collective.
Mm-hmm. I know what it's like running one of those.
Yes, you certainly do. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's exciting and it's like ever changing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm just so curious about, what you said, how it's changed. What has changed, or what have you learned from some of these people? Because I think really the reason I wanted to talk about this is because there are a lot of people out there who maybe have thought about doing this, but there isn't a lot of options. And as someone who has been a non-drinker since I was basically alive, I, have gone to breweries and been like, yeah, there's really nothing here for me. I'll just drink water. Like, it's just kind of, that's been my experience for many years. And recently it's changed, but it's like, I'm curious what some of the people coming to these meetings have to say about this, and like what their thoughts and opinions have been.
Yeah, the assumptions that we started with or tried not to start with have been shown to us in that there are many barriers. So, for example, we thought it might be easy to suggest to bars and restaurants that they put these 4 items on their non-alcoholic menu. Not so easy. It really is education based, and that's where Zeroproof Collective is leaning into too. Like lowering the sugar content for these drinks. Like there were several things that we realized that our audience that we want to talk to doesn't yet even know. And I would say from many menus in the public in general saying, we see more non-alcoholic options on menus than we've ever seen. But with Zeroproof Collective, we are really looking at what are those options? Is it Red Bull? Is it kombucha? Is it, all other sorts of substances? Is it a sugary mocktail? Which is another term we can discuss, but we really want to elevate it. So the assumption was that, bars, restaurants, venues would be open to that and understanding it, but we found that we need to do a lot of education to get to that point and build those relationships so that anything NA we introduce to a community actually has some staying power. Like we don't want to introduce it and then have it fail and then have it go away and people be like, we've tried that, didn't work, we're not doing it again.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cause I feel like there's so many people that just don't even think about it. Like it's almost like it's not even a thought. So it's like, I think it's that education piece is so important. And I'm curious what you guys are doing. Is it just the meetings with that, or are you presenting these findings to some restaurants and breweries and places, or what are you doing with the education piece?
Yeah, so far, we're talking within our collective and we're building some case studies. We have an amazing case study with Cove Edina, which was about a 4-month partnership to work not only to get these amazing non-alcoholic cocktails on their menu, but to have servers understand them, fully understand what people coming into their restaurant are looking for, because most of those people have not traditionally asked for an elevated NA beverage. Literally, the community in recovery and those who don't drink for whatever reason have been told you should be fine with tea, coffee, water, soda. And we just don't ask. I mean, in my personal experience of 8 years of looking at menus, scanning them when I go to a restaurant with friends who drink, there's nothing. And it's so painful to be the one to like try to talk with the server, have them figure out what you need. Oh, they do have something they can make for you behind the scenes, but it's not on the menu. It's just this experience of othering. So the idea is that we want more people to feel empowered to ask for these things and explain that to their server, or what is it that they're looking for. And that group has just been told for so long, you're fine. Don't ruffle any feathers by like asking for what you want. So that is another piece of it that we want to see change for the public as well.
Yeah, because I feel like the more voices that are saying these things, the more the restaurants will be like, oh, we should probably have that because so many people are interested in this, and I
Right.
know that you've talked about how like there has been more people buying them than ever because they're available, and because they weren't, they're like like the breweries and restaurants didn't realize that there was a demand,
Yes, right. So one of the case studies we have built really shows that you can generate revenue. Essentially, we're taking the people that have water and Diet Coke, and we're shifting them to this elevated experience. And it works really great with food, we have found. So if you're just going into a bar that is mostly focused on alcohol, that transition or that offerings to moving to M or NA might be a little more challenging. But what we found is if there's food and these non-alcoholic beverages pair with them, the experience, that's what people are really looking for. So that's been a great learning as well for Kate and I. And I should mention Kate Faulkner. She is my co-founder in Zeroproof Collective, and we've worked together on all of these learnings since May. So
yeah, that's amazing. So I want to talk a little bit more about the being someone who doesn't drink and what that's like. And because it's like somebody who maybe is considering it, like I think a lot of people are hesitant to do it because of the social stigma or for other reasons. What has your experience been, and how have you been able to maintain your sobriety for all these years?
Yeah, I mean, definitely things have changed over the last 10 years. When I was 40 and started my sober journey, I had several relapses because I would be fine on my own. And then I went into a social space and it was just so frustrating. There's just no support to do it, to continue, and that sober kind of, or alcohol-free choice if you're in those environments. So that stood out very like specifically in my journey. And I thought there's got to be others, that do a 30, 60, 90-day treatment and come out of that not able to sustain it. And that is a cultural piece of it. That is the way that we approach treatment and addiction in this country. So, my journey has really been about highlighting that we should and can have these options because it helps people achieve more sustainable sobriety.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it needs to be talked about more, and just in general. And I think that a lot of times it's been kind of this elephant in the room that like there are people that have this decision that they've made and it is hard to keep it, but it's like, how do we as a culture make it okay to make that decision without feeling that pressure? And I think that's what you're kind of also providing with Zero Proof, is like an option when people go out socially to have something to drink.
Yeah.
That isn't alcohol,
Yes. So early on in the collective, we said this is not first and foremost for people in recovery. They will benefit tremendously from it, but where we see the change in the opportunity is acceptance. So if we can say, and this is where I've landed in my journey now after 8 years, is that I accept it all. Like I have to remember that I was drinking in those spaces. I was once at that point where if somebody told me they weren't, I would just be like, well, you're no fun, right? It's like, I have to remember that because that's where the change happens. That's where people can start to test it out and start to experiment with it. And we actually love it if people, do decide that I'm going to have an alcoholic cocktail, but, oh, I have to drive home. I'm going to switch to like an NA version of that, or just taper off my drinking so I can be productive. I can show up in my relationships. I can be well, all of those things. So we really love that model, and that community nationally is so large, and the potential to shift that for everyone. So the big distinction is we're not trying to say, am I an alcoholic or am I not? Now there is like this full spectrum of whatever you want to call it. Like I sometimes say I'm sober necessary. I know I will never drink again. It's not going to work for me, but there's others in the middle who, through like dry January and other experiments, figuring out their relationship with alcohol, have actually just said, I can take or leave it, but I actually prefer to leave it now. Those are the stories that I love. And coming from young people or younger generation, this is the first generation, Gen Z, that have really just full out questioned their relationship with alcohol from the beginning. They've seen their parents, they've seen all the destruction that it causes, and they're just like, we don't need it. I mean, there's other challenges within that group for sure with mental health and everything. But I think there's really good signs that the tides are shifting, that for wellness or whatever reason, you can just simply choose not to drink. No questions asked.
Exactly. And I think for me, like one of the things that I've used as, how do I describe this? I've used as almost an excuse is the health piece is like, hey, there's been a lot of studies that have shown the negative effects. And so it's like, and there's even more coming out. I don't know if you listen to the Andrew Huberman podcast where he talked about it. I mean, that was a huge, I think, wake up call for a lot of people. That's one of the biggest podcasts out there. And it was a very, very intense episode where he walked through specifically how it impacts the body. And I think a lot of people were like, oh, I've been told that, like one thing forever. And it's like, that's not true. Like from the medical perspective, have you seen a shift even since some of this new research has come out in the last couple of months?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. That podcast is amazing. And what I noticed even probably 2 or 3 months ago, there were some new studies coming out, and the national media picked up again. They're still talking about how much alcohol consumption is safe. And so they're still in this like idea of, well, you can have this much. Like everyone wants to know how much you can have. And I've replied back, we've tweeted back and forth because I just feel like the conversation needs to totally shift from that and just assume that it's not good for you. And like, what does that look like? Like, I just think it's a slippery slope when you are looking at some of those numbers and you're like, oh, I can have, 2 glasses of wine per X, through the week. It comes from a mindset of deprivation. It's just like, it's like we follow everything, right? In America, it's like, how much can I have of this? If we're even on a, diet for what we're consuming food wise in our body, there's always like this idea of follow this, follow that. And I would love to see people just break out of that and assume that, what would my life actually be like without alcohol? Because in my TED talk, I really stressed that it kept me small. It kept me so out of my productivity and my purpose, and any amount of alcohol could do that for a person. So when you kind of like health reasons, yes, for sure, but also looking at, what's your life's purpose? And is substance, misuse kind of preventing you from reaching that?
Yeah. And that's kind of why I started this podcast or changed it. Cause I've had this podcast for, almost 6 years, and it's been a bunch of different things, but I'm like, you know what? I only want to continue doing the podcast if I feel like it makes sense to me to talk about things that I really want to talk about and spend my time doing. And this is a topic I've never talked about ever on this podcast. I've never mentioned the fact that I don't drink. Like it's not something I've ever brought up ever. And so this is the first episode I'm doing on it. And because I've recently switched the premise to being about optimizing your life, it's like, I think we do need to talk about the benefits of not drinking, because it's almost like, you're right, like it would come from a scarcity where it's like, oh, how will my life be less good if I don't drink, versus like how can it be better, and like talk about the benefits versus like, oh, this is gonna suck. Like I one of the things I do a lot is fasting, and a lot of people question that. I'm actually fasting today. They're like, well, oh, that seems so hard. Like I'd never be able to do it. I'm like, but do you understand the benefits? Like there's a lot of things where it's like, you look at the negative sides of things when you should be looking at the positives, and almost how like I'm able to become a lot more mentally strong by, I guess abstinence in that way of abstaining from eating for a day. Like it allows me to be stronger at saying no. Like I'm not gonna eat food today. Like it's like same with alcohol. Like I feel like I've built up that muscle of being able to say no to things. And I honestly feel like since doing that, I'm able to be more in control of the pressure on me, because I'm like, it's just an automatic answer.
Yeah. A couple things there. I love that. It is awareness, right? And if you are not aware, there's literally, no decision that you can change or make differently if you don't have awareness. So by looking at your relationship with alcohol, you can start to have that. And a lot of people will do dry January and at the end go right back to drinking, but they still have a month's worth of awareness. And that's great. I mean, that's how often, long it takes. So I I think the awareness piece is big. I think the muscle you mentioned. So for example, when I got sober, I took my decades long habits of working out 5 days a week. Like I've always done that. And I applied that muscle to alcohol, like trying to rid alcohol. And then what I noticed is that literally you can apply that muscle, that kind of awareness and decision making to every aspect of your life, which you've done, Jenna. I mean, you've been working out, you've just been like crushing it over the last year. And it builds that sort of confidence in yourself. So I think that's great.
Yeah. What are some other benefits you'd say of not drinking, in terms of like, if somebody's thinking about it and considering it, like what have you found has it improved your life?
Well, productivity, number one. Oftentimes I become acutely aware at different like business networking events or events that a lot of people may go home and either continue drinking or driving home, all of those things. And it just like to be able to like have a full life and do all the things that I want to do, that in the past, I could never fit everything that I'm doing now into that lifestyle. It would literally be from happy hour and then basically zero productivity, and then get up the next day, kind of do it again. And now it's like, oh, I can do an hour and a half networking event, and then I can come home if I need to work and do all the other things and show up. I mean, that's the showing up and being present is also a huge part of that. I feel like alcohol suppresses that. And the idea is that, alcohol loosens you up, which it can in the beginning, but it's like this big connector thing that people do together. And once you exercise that muscle, that's not needed, that is an amazing feeling. So I would encourage people to think about, also knowing that it's really hard in the beginning. It's certainly not easy, but to keep sticking with it and keep testing those boundaries for yourself.
How did it improve your, like, I guess, mental health as well, or just other physical health in terms of sleeping and that sort of thing?
Oh, sleeping was huge. I mean, it's really hard to believe. Like if you listen to some of the podcasts, that you were talking about, and like how it affects the brain, and like waking up in the middle of the night and then trying to wake up in the morning and feel rested just wasn't ever happening. And so I think sleep is a huge one, and just general trust in yourself, that you're going to be able to get things done. And I think it automatically decreases anxiety. For me, it did. I had a lot of anxiety around the last kind of year of my alcohol misuse that was tied to workplace anxiety that just kept spiraling and heightening. So it really doesn't get better. Alcoholism itself and alcohol misuse can be a very progressive disease. So you can find yourself very quickly on a downward spiral.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people use it as a way to escape, or as a way to almost try to assuage their, like insecurities or anxieties, but it actually just usually makes it worse. And
it makes it worse.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people realize that after time, but it's kind of, it's presented to us in society as, it's not a big deal. Like it's just something that, everyone does. But I think it's the norm. Yeah. Like you said. Yeah. I'm curious about your TED Talk, because I know that you just did that. What was like kind of the thesis of that, and how did people respond to that?
Yeah, I submitted the idea in January of 2022, and then kind of moved through a process where I delivered the talk October 29th. So it was about 10 months of editing, coming back to the content. And really the idea, when I looked at other TED Talks on alcoholism, were about brain health and, personal journeys, addiction, gray area drinking, but no one had really yet talked about social spaces, and also what had happened during the pandemic, which is a lot of makers of these products went to work and they created the actual tactical things that we need in our spaces to support non-alcoholic choices. So the talk really came from the convergence of those major things happening, and coming out of the pandemic, looking at our relationship with alcohol. Many, especially women with young children, suffered the most from alcohol misuse during the pandemic. So timing wise, it feels really important. Like I'm building on the sober curious movement, I say, which started in 2018, which is about our personal relationship with alcohol and questioning it. And now 4 years later, the idea is that we are boldly asking for non-alcoholic options in our social spaces. So it's, let's keep the momentum going. Let's keep moving so that we do have change.
Yeah, not make it a trend that'll only last a year or
Right.
something. Yeah.
Right.
Because
Right.
I think that it's kind of like any type of movement, like sometimes it'll be short-lived and sometimes it'll be, it'll change society. So I think right now, we're in kind of a moment where we have to make sure that it stays a talking point and not just a trend and a fad. Because I've been seeing a lot of magazine articles recently about it. And I'm like, all right, this is not like something that is a fad to me. So it's like, it's something that it's like, I'm glad that it's finally being talked about, but like the fact that it wasn't just makes me kind of sad, because it's like, this should have been a topic of conversation for years, but it just hasn't been. And I'm glad it's finally happening, but it's like, I wish that there was more discussion around it. I'm glad that you're starting this group, because I think it is bringing that, which we needed. Like this should have been existing 10 years ago, but that is just,
Well, interestingly enough, Dry January just celebrated 10 years, January 2023. But to your point, I feel like I talk a lot about like, it's like a tipping point, right? At some time you have enough momentum, and the corporate space has been so fascinating to me because there are some barriers in bars and restaurants. They make their revenue, they create their whole experience around alcohol. Most of them do. So yes, that is a space that we want to make an impact in, but the corporate space is so appealing because business leaders and cultures are now saying we are, wellness forward. What does that mean? And for some, unfortunately, it could mean like a yoga class paired with beer or wine and wellness. I can't tell you how many times I see that. So there's interest and momentum in the well-being space in corporate. And I think that is a great place to introduce some of these concepts around not drinking and social experiences. Right? I mean, employees are starting to want that, and they're starting to reevaluate, especially in professions like lawyers, marketing and sales, that it has always just been the norm that there's so much alcohol consumed. So shifting that in those spaces seems like a really powerful thing that just as Zeroproof Collective, and we're starting to tackle that now as well.
So I know what we had talked about at the beginning, a little bit about alignment and about how it's aligning with your life. Can you talk a little bit more about that? When you brought that up, I was like, oh, I'm curious.
Oh, yeah. Gosh, Jenna. Okay. So I should also mention that I'm an introvert at heart. Yeah. I do. Well, I also love building communities. So I love like intentional one-on-one, but the reason I did my TED Talk, the reason I'm being like open about this is because I'm just so passionate about it. So that alignment piece, when you look at like 10 years ago, how just basically shut down I was, never in a million years would have imagined like publicly speaking that, I had this journey with alcohol that was devastating. So like moving through that, finding alignment with my Spark Track business, which is events where I continued to see alcohol use, moving into my personal brand where I'm talking about things in our social spaces, and then finally Zeroproof. So the alignment, with those three right now are so connected to like my personal passions that sometimes I wonder what email to send something with, because it's like it just all overlaps when I'm reaching out and connecting with people. And I think that to me is so exciting. I want that for people. And then reflecting on my career outlook in my 20s, where I thought I would always keep my career siloed from my personal life. That is just not even a thing anymore. It's also interconnected.
Yeah, I feel that way too. Cause sometimes I'm like, oh, I do a bunch of different things, and sometimes they don't feel like they overlap. But then I'm like, I'm trying to figure out how to make them overlap so that they're not completely
you
separate.
And me both. Yes.
Yeah. And that's one of my goals for this year is like, I'm like eliminating certain things or bringing certain things in to kind of just bridge the gap. Cause it's like, there's a lot of the stuff I do locally doesn't always translate to my online audience. So it's like figuring out how, and then vice versa. So it's like figuring out how they all come together. But I'm really excited to see you continue to grow this. And what are your plans for the future? Like, what are you planning with the Zero Proof, expanding that and continue to grow that?
Yeah, we are starting to see this amazing intersection between corporate coming to us to do like a non-alcoholic bar at an event, right, that they have. And then the second layer to that is actually talking with HR and leadership to not only have that one experience, but to talk about how that impacted, the event. And then how does that carry over into what could be a workplace culture that decentralizes alcohol? So that feels really good right now. And then we are continuing. Our future goals are to have this kind of criteria or standard for bars, restaurants, and events to be able to understand what an elevated non-alcoholic offering looks like and to help them get there. So a lot of it, is just a little bit of consulting, but then the connections to this amazing product. And also, how do you present? Like, our goal would be to have, 5 to 8 non-alcoholic offerings. So you're covering your cocktails, and then you also have a red and white non-alcoholic wine. You have, a non-alcoholic champagne, and you have a couple NA beers. So it's like the whole option versus 2 or 3. So, and giving people kind of the toolkit to get there and build that. You don't just start with a full-on offering. You have to kind of understand your audience and work with the servers and the experience in a bar and restaurant, for example, to deliver that. So that's a sustainable piece of it as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm so happy that you were able to come on today, Jen, to share, because I think this is a really important topic. Is there any last tips you'd give to someone who is maybe considering this shift?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that I had to do was anytime you're going into a social experience, doing your homework, either telling a friend or, stating, I'm not going to be drinking tonight. And then if like you're looking at a restaurant or bar you're going to and you see they have nothing, how are you going to handle that situation? Sometimes if you're going to a party with friends, you bring your own. Bring your own, and people start asking, what are you drinking versus why aren't you drinking? So thinking about that intentionally, because that's where I think people get tripped up. You can be fine on your own, like you're cruising through your week, making non-alcoholic choices, and then you're just stopped in your tracks at a social setting that doesn't support that. So to be able to be thinking about that is probably my best advice, and also voicing it. I mean, for years, I would make these deals with myself in my head, and then no one knew about it, so I could break that. And having a partner or person that supports that is the accountability piece is huge.
Yeah, that's amazing. So awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jen, for coming on.
Yeah.
How do we find you on social media so that we can follow you?
Yeah, so Jen Gilhoi is my Instagram handle. And then I would also follow us on Zeroproof Collective on Instagram. We've got a website as well. I think Instagram has been a really great place to connect with people. So we're getting a lot of DMs and a lot of interest from our community that way. So I would say those 2 places. And yeah, always up for a collaboration.
I was gonna say, if people, because I might have some listeners across the country as well. So if they wanted to start something in their city, are you expanding, to other cities?
Yes. I would love to, because that's an organic thing. I would love to talk with people that are interested nationally in creating something like that in their community and be really open about what it looks like so that we can have more of that momentum.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.